Hey guys, I wanted to show you some excerpts from the new content that'll be coming out on Patreon for the Painting Materials course. So if you really want to start stepping up your understanding and rendering of your materials in your artwork, then you want to check out these lessons. Now remember, big information here. You do need to be pledged on Patreon before March 1st, 2021 in order to get these lessons. Depending on the tier that you choose, you can either get just the new lessons 4 through 6, or you can get all of the ones 1 through 6. Full details on the page about that. But with that aside, take a look at some of the excerpts. Every material will behave a certain way. Wood is a striated material, and it is also organic, which means that it grows and bends and wrinkles in a particular way. Tinfoil isn't going to behave that way. Rock isn't going to behave that way. Skin actually behaves very similar. You get very similar folds in skin as you do with bark. Anyway, understanding how things are constructed with their material behavior is a great way to start building in believability into your materials. If this little guy is in an environment where there is just heavy, dark objects all the way around him, right? Black felt, which is one of the most absorbing materials that we have, then there is going to be a very low amount of ambient light because the light just isn't bouncing around, right? There's very little light. Everything is absorbing the light in the area, which means that his shadow is going to be quite dark. There's going to be very little indirect environment value. However, if this fella over here was in an environment with lots of really light objects, everything is white around him, a little white room, then his value can be much lighter. You probably still have like a little core shadow though. So you can see that depending on the environment, the overall light or dark value of the shadow can change. This is also kind of dealing with fill light, but we're talking about indirect light here and not direct. But here we have our light source, right? And we'll just call this a light bulb. And let's put an object in here. It is going to be catching a lot of light. It's very close, lots of photons shooting out there and lighting up this object. But what happens, of course, if I just get this object and I move him down here? Ooh, interesting. The object is still the same size, but all of a sudden I literally halved the intensity of the light. Let's say that there was a shield on this light so that no light could go out in any of this direction, only this direction that you see in this field. Then this would be 1/4, and this would be 1/2, 3/4, and 4. That would be all of the light. But by moving this back here, look at that. I just made it 1, 2. It's not catching any of the light over here and not catching any of the light over here. So by increasing the distance, I am halving the actual intensity of the light. Glossiness. Guys, this is the big one. If there is going to be any subject that is going to be the core issue of how to get better material rendering and believable materials, this is going to be it. The misapplication of it makes everything feel like it's made of the same plastic-like material. Materials that all look kind of the same. The skin, the leather, the leaves, the metal, all has the same sort of plasticky look. And that is because they're not handling the glossiness and the shininess correctly. However, if you do apply it correctly, this can be the fastest and most effective way to improve your material rendering. In our example here, we've got some skin. So this one in the middle looks correct. And why is that? Well, we have a range here. This one is dull, and this one is shiny, and this one is what you will call luster. It's not really shiny, and it's not really dull. It's somewhere in between. If you get a material and you put it into the wrong category, then it makes that material look wrong. That plasticky stuff that we talked about earlier, everything kind of having the same look, usually that's somewhere around here. So if we get the skin and we make it too dull, it ends up just looking like a wooden carving that's kind of been painted. It doesn't have enough sheen to it. There's no oil in the skin, there's no moisture in the eye. However, if you go too far with it, the skin looks like wax or plaster, or maybe they've got a bunch of like suntan oil or something spread all over their skin. Their skin is simply too shiny. So if you can hit the material's right spot on where it should be on that scale, it's really going to help to sell that correctly. The whole idea of having to use a tinted light on things that already have a varied amount of color on the objects can be a little brain bending. Now, this artist took on a lot of those ideas, but I think they overlooked a couple of things. And I'm also going to note, after we do a breakdown of this student's work, a little trick that could make this sort of thing a lot easier. And maybe some of you thought of it. But if not, we'll break it down and I'll show you what it is. Okay, so stepping through it here. One of the first thing that catches me here on this version that has the orange light on it is how this shadow in here is getting really blue. Now that is following one of the things that we talked about, which is shadows will take on the color of the bounce light or secondary light. However, in this case, the bounce light ought to be orange because this is all orange in here. It's an orange object to begin with, and it has an orange light on it. And this is gray, which means that it's going to take on the color of whatever the light source and environment around it is. And the blue really isn't going to be powerful enough to work its way into the opposite side of the shape and into the bottom in order to tint that. So what we're really going to be seeing is a lot more of the orangey tone. Now you notice that this background has largely stayed unchanged, even though it should have an orange light on it. Now how does that fall in our little breakdown? Well, we know that the blue is a complementary color to the orange, which means that that blue background should darken and go towards neutral. So instead of this, it ought to be much darker and much closer to neutral, something perhaps more in that territory. So take a look at that on yours. Is the blue too bright for it being under an orange light? And I wouldn't be surprised to see if this was even extra warm. An orange object being hit with an orange light is going to get really warm inside of there. So that would be an initial look at this and the way that these things could be affected. Now, what's a little trick here? If I was to approach this, I'm thinking, is there an easier way to find the answers to this problem? Is there something that Photoshop could do, assuming most of you are using Photoshop or something similar? Is there some way that I can get it to work out the answers for me? And this is how I would consider approaching it. What I'm thinking is I've got 3